Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sports Countdown podcast with Declan Hughes and me, Peter Lynch. Today we're delighted to welcome Ryan Roberts to the show. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely, fellas. Appreciate you guys having me on. This is really cool. You guys getting this started, and I'm happy to be the first guest. So in a future episode, when someone says trivia question, who was the first guest on the Sports Countdown podcast? Ryan Roberts. There you are.
Amazing. Well, yeah, thanks again. Honestly, it's a big deal for us, of course. I think maybe just some listeners would like to know maybe a bit about yourself first up, and maybe your experiences with sports.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm the director of scouting at NFL Draft Bible, which is the main source of NFL draft content powered by Sports Illustrated, which, if you grew up in the States, Sports Illustrated is a big deal. And it was something where you get the magazine. It used to be like once a month or once a week. I forget what it was as a child. And it's kind of been surreal, just that transition over to Sports Illustrated now and to be the NFL draft provider. So what I kind of do is I have my scouting team. We're scouting away players for the 2021 NFL draft right now, finishing up the process. We are up to over 500 players that we have, in-depth breakdowns with, trying to give the most comprehensive outlook of the class in general. And, outside of that, I also do a daily podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish Athletics, covering that. And then I do the Believe in NFL Draft Prospect podcast to continue draft coverage. And then I'm also – last thing, and then I'll let you guys, I'll stop talking so much. Last thing I do is I Mav Sports Take, which is a weekly podcast with David Turner, who's a former NFL scout for 18 years. And we kind of go more from the business side of sports, and just really dive into some of the things that maybe people don't talk about as much, that they don't see on a daily basis or on Saturdays, Sundays, like just trying to get like the full scope of why sports leagues and sports teams do the things that they do and make the transactions that they force through, and just where the money aspect of everything is. So that's kind of just to the business side of sports as well.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, busy times then, and it's only gonna keep getting busier with Super Bowl weekend coming up. Obviously, a massive time for American sports and for NFL. A lot of the pre-match talk is gonna focus on certain matchups, and of course, maybe the biggest matchup of them all, the quarterbacks. So you have Patrick Mahomes, you have Tom Brady. Can you see either one of those two coming out on top? They obviously have a lot of history against each other, and who's gonna do what come game time. But how do you see this one going between those two?
Well, it's a really fun matchup because you have Tom Brady, who is now playing in his 10th Super Bowl, looking for his 7th Super Bowl victory. He is, in my opinion, the unquestioned greatest quarterback of all time, at least when you're talking about the accomplishments that he has and the things that he's been able to do at 43 years old, throwing 40 touchdowns this year. Just a fantastic year, first year out off of the New England Patriots team and on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So obviously he's kind of transcended what people assumed was, hey, that New England system is just how he fits well. That's why he's so successful. But he's proven this year that it is, he is a big part of what makes him the best quarterback of all time. So we have that, the older guy, and then we have the young gun in Patrick Mahomes, who, I mean, honestly, if I just took like a 2 to 3 year sample size of NFL quarterbacks, I could argue that he's the best quarterback of all time in just a short window because he is that fantastic. So his thing is going to be, can you put the career longevity together enough to be in that conversation eventually as maybe the top quarterback of all time? So you have the old guy that's been doing it for the longest time, has more accomplishments than anybody, versus maybe the best, but in a very short amount of time, the young gun. And some people are going to say, is this a passing of the torch? Is Patrick Mahomes going to kind of send Tom Brady off into the sunset, get the victory, and then really assert himself as the unquestioned league's best, even though he already is? Or is Tom Brady, again, going to be the guy that you just can't count out? So it's a really fun conversation. And, I mean, this has to be – I would guess that this is probably the biggest gap from ages in Super Bowl history of the starting quarterbacks, because I think Pat Mahomes is about 24, 25 years old, and then Tom Brady's 43. So obviously there's a very big difference in their ages and experiences, which makes this such a fascinating game to watch from the quarterback's perspective.
Ryan.
Yeah, I mean,
I just wanted to say, on like the defenses, I think both of them have improved drastically in the last few years. They've made some good trades and some good draft picks in that sense. So obviously the two quarterbacks we've discussed are at a high level. Possibly two of them can go down as the greatest of all time. So I wanted to ask you, like, what do you think the defenses have to do to try and contain Brady and Mahomes? And can that give them, what advantage would that give them going into the game?
Yeah, I think with Tom Brady, it's, he's 43 years old. He's never been the most athletic quarterback of all time. So it's going to be making him uncomfortable. It's going to be getting a lot of pressure on him, making him, rush throws, rush decisions. Like that's how you're going to make some decision making. You saw that against, the Green Bay Packers in the NFC Championship game. Like he has, when he's forced off of his spot and off his platform, he can make a rush decision at times. We saw that with the 3 interceptions in the last game. So that's kind of like where you need to make him create mistakes. And how do you do that is creating pressure. If you just sit back and just let him, get really comfortable in the pocket, he's going to tear you apart because he's been doing this forever. Like that's just what he does. The other side, it's a little different because Pat Mahomes is a guy that I would not blitz too much. I wouldn't put a lot of pressure on him because he's a guy that can escape the pocket. He's a good athlete. Like he can move around a little bit more than Tom Brady. For me, the way to beat Pat Mahomes is you can't run a bunch of man coverage. You have to mix things up. You have to give him different looks. It can't be the same thing on a snap to snap basis. You have to make him continuously think every single snap and not really know what's coming post snap. Like that's the way to make him make mistakes, is to just keep things moving, keep things different. Don't get into this lull where like, okay, I'm just going to run man coverage across the board. I'm just going to let him figure things out and make it easy for him. You really have to try to confuse him. So he's a little different than Brady as far as like how you attack him. But I think the difference in this game is which quarterback makes less mistakes. Who is the guy that throws less interceptions? Maybe doesn't turn the ball over once. That is who I think is going to come out on top in this matchup.
Good stuff. So I just wanted to ask as well, Ryan. We talked a little bit about the defense, but do you see like a real momentum shift moment in the game that could have like a significant impact on the outcome?
I think that it's probably the end of first halves, the end of halves, I should say, is probably going to be where the momentum shift is, because I think that this is going to be a close football game. I don't think that this is going to be like a 10-point margin of victory for either side. I think this is going to come down to a last possession. So if you're coming down to last possessions, that means everything matters. And so the end of the first half, whether it's in the 2-minute drill, and the end of the football game, the end of the fourth quarter, I think that in those situations where the lights are shining bright, it's going to be versus, the best quarterback in the league right now versus the guy that's been doing it forever and is the greatest quarterback of all time, who ascends and who takes advantage of that opportunity. I think is going to really capture the victory, because I think that those moments are what make players great and what makes quarterbacks great. And I think that game, being such a close game, is going to come down to the final 2 minutes of either half.
Just sorry, guys, to interrupt. I know you were talking tactics and getting stuck in, but Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the first time a team is going to play a Super Bowl at home. So that's going to be for Tampa Bay. Do you think? I know it's given the current circumstances, there's it's not going to be a full house, but do you see home advantage playing a part here?
Yep. Before the season, we talked a lot about this. I don't think home field advantage is quite to the degree that it has been. I think it's more because there's only going to be, I think it came out this morning, there's only going to be 25,000 fans in attendance that they can have in the stadium. So it's not a true home field, feel to the game. Like it's not a true home field advantage. But what I think is the real advantage is Tampa Bay is going to be practicing at their practice field that they practice at all the time. They're going to be in their locker room that they're at all the time. They're going to be around their family like they are around all the time. It's about being comfortable. So I think more for the players, the pregame and the week leading up to the game, being comfortable and being a situation where they always are in, and that they know that moments and they know how they prepare for these home games, I think is a big advantage. I don't think that the advantage is going to be as much during the game as like your traditional like home field advantage and fans going crazy and being loud when offense is on the field. Like I don't think that's going to play a big part, but I think that the week leading up, the practice time, like I think that's where the most advantage is going to come into.
Makes sense. Yeah, definitely.
So, just last question, maybe on the game. Um, who are barring the quarterbacks? Obviously, we know like the weapons that both Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes have, but who do you think is going to be the main target or the main focus for each of the quarterbacks going into the game?
I think that the biggest advantage that Kansas City is going to have. I mean, it's hard to pick between Travis Kelsey and Tyreek Hill because they're both so fantastic. But I think one spot that Tampa Bay's defense has struggled with a little bit is their cornerback play is not great. Carlton Davis has been okay. Sean Murphy Bunting has had flashes, but it's been pretty inconsistent. And now they're going up against Tyreek Hill, who is maybe the most explosive player in all of football, right? Like if you
Yep.
make a mistake against him, it's a 60-yard touchdown. Like that's
Yeah.
just kind of what it looks like. So I think Tyreek Hill is going to end up being the guy that makes a couple explosive plays, probably the biggest target in the passing game for Kansas City. And then Tampa Bay, I think that it's going to come down to old reliable for Tom Brady. You know, I think that we have seen flashes of his comfortability with Rob Gronkowski throughout the season, but it's been a little up and down. It's been a little hit or miss. This is a game where I think that Gronk might actually get a ton of targets and might come down to be a big factor in the game because, you know, in those big moments where the lights are going to shine brightest, Tom Brady's going to go to a target that he trusts absolutely. You know, Mike Evans is a great player. Chris Godwin is a great player, but they are still in their first year playing with Tom Brady. He's been there and done that with Rob Gronkowski so much at this point that I think he's going to be a huge emphasis in the passing game, especially in the most crucial situations of the game.
So, like, I'm right in saying that they played earlier in the season, right? And that's when was that the game where Tyreek Hill had that monster game? So,
They
like,
played. Yeah, sorry, guys, Declan.
yeah. So, like, do you think they'll have learned from that then on how to try and contain Hill? Obviously, it's really hard because you've got Tyreek Hill and you've got Kelsey. It's hard to double both of them, but they've got. I think personally, they've got to stop those like big monster plays if they've got a chance to win this.
Yeah. I think where teams have had some success against Kansas City's passing offense, they've played a bunch of like cover 3, cover 4 defense where like they're keeping everything in front of them. They don't let the guys get one-on-one. So I think that even though Tampa Bay does run a ton of man coverage, I think they might mix in a little more zone so that they're not letting guys get behind them as much. So I think that will come into effect, and I think that they'll kind of have that in the back of their minds. I think though it's about picking spots because you can't just do that every single play, or else Pat Mahomes is going to just easy completions. Like eventually they're going to come into a situation where Carlton Davis is one-on-one against a guy like Tyreek Hill or Sean Murphy Bunting is somebody like Jamil Dean. Like somebody's going to have a one-on-one opportunity against Tyreek Hill. And at that point, like, I used to coach with a guy that said, like, it's not about the X's and the O's, it's about the Jimmies and the Joes. So it's about it. At some point, it's Tyreek Hill is just better than Carlton Davis, in a one-on-one matchup. Like, there's nothing from a coaching perspective that you can really. You can temper that a little bit with, like I said, mixing in the zone, but if you're a man-to-man coverage, like he's just not going to be in a great matchup against Tyreek Hill. So I think eventually they're going to get those matchups. And at that point, it's just about the offensive line holding up and seeing if Tyreek Hill can create some problems for some of those defensive backs.
Awesome. So, the main point of the Sports Countdown podcast is we like to do our top 3 of all, well, not of all time, but our top 3 moments. Okay, so we are focusing on the quarterbacks this week. So with our special guest, we are going to put you on the spot, and we want to know who your top 3 quarterbacks of all time are. Just your personal favorites, maybe not who is the best, but your personal start from 3, and we'll go into 1.
Yeah, sure. So number 3, I would say personal favorites. I've had a big thing for Russell Wilson for the longest time. He was he was at North Carolina State, was a very good quarterback, also played baseball, was actually drafted in the second round in the MLB draft. So there was some conversation at some point because he's only right around 5'10", 5'11", like, is he going to play baseball instead of football? So it even got to a point where NC State was like, maybe you should go play baseball. And so he actually left and played at Wisconsin for 1 year in college, his final season, because NC State basically didn't want him at that point. They're like, you want to play baseball, go play baseball. So he went there, had a great season, gets drafted in the 3rd or 4th round of the NFL draft, and he made a decision to put baseball on the back burner and check out what football has for him. So he came in as a little more of a, lightly sought after prospect because of the height and everything. And he's really the first guy, because everyone's going to point to Doug Flutie, who was like 5'9", as the quarterback that started the trend of shorter quarterbacks. But until Russell Wilson really got his opportunity, he was the first guy that broke that 6 foot marker, right? Like everyone was like, oh, you have to be 6 foot plus to play quarterback. Russell Wilson was the first guy that not only was successful, but became one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And for me, he's such a good person. Everything you hear about him with the charities and just him as a father and all these good things. So when you couple that with what he's been able to accomplish, it's always been a personal favorite of mine, just the story, because he's a guy that like a lot of people doubted, but he continues. I mean, even now, 10 plus years into his career, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league and a future Hall of Famer. So he's been just a lot of fun to watch for. So I would probably put him at number 3.
Yeah, I mean, he had an excellent start to this season as well. No, they let Russ cook's the big motto for him. So kind of tailed off a little bit, but you can still obviously see the talent that he has there. Kind of like Tom Brady when he was at the Patriots. Like, not a lot of receivers throughout the years that are like properly like studs, but he's got a couple now. So again, I think they'll be a threat next year.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that every year that you have Russell Wilson, you have a chance because he's that good.
Yeah.
It's just the question on like, did you put enough around him to maybe make a run at the Super Bowl? But I mean, man, he's so much fun to watch because you watch him and you're just like, how does he do some of the stuff he does at that size? Like it doesn't make any sense. And a lot of guys now are breaking that mold. You see Kyler Murray come in now, who's right around the same size. He's really laying the foundation for future great quarterbacks and to continue this trend. And now we're at a point, from a scouting perspective, an NFL draft perspective, height doesn't matter as much for the quarterbacks anymore. So he's literally broken the mold and made a new standard on what could be successful at the quarterback position. He's just such a fun player to watch every Sunday.
Good stuff. So who's better? Who's your more favorite than Russell then? You've set a good benchmarker there.
Yeah, definitely.
I know. That was a glowing review for only number 3 on the list. So my wife might be a little surprised in this one because this is the one that she predicted. Number 2 for me would be Kurt Warner, who so for people that don't know, I'm a Rams supporter. Obviously, when my Rams fandom started, they were in St. Louis, but now they're in Los Angeles. And when I grew up, I was about 8, 9 years old, and they had a team that they called the Greatest Show on Turf, which was, man, I'm telling you, like when you talk about just fun offensive fireworks, like Marshall Faulk, who's in the Hall of Fame, Isaac Bruce, who's in the Hall of Fame, Torrey Holt, who might go in the Hall of Fame one day, that's running back with 2 wide receivers. This team was explosive, and they were the best football team in the league at the time and the best offense in the league at the time. And I remember them playing in the Super Bowl. The 1999-2000 season was my first like real memory of football. And they had a quarterback there that was Kurt Warner, who's in the Hall of Fame now, who was, man, he was just my favorite, to be honest, for a large portion of my childhood, because he was a guy that went to a small school in northern Iowa, wasn't drafted, went to the Arena League, went over to NFL Europe and was playing there when they had the NFL Europe League. And he bounced around. He was actually bagging groceries, and he was on the Green Bay Packers team on the practice squad. He got cut. He went to the Rams team. He was on the practice squad. Then he got moved up to the starting lineup eventually when Trent Green actually got hurt. He was like a 27 or 28-year-old rookie who had like just been bouncing around forever. And in his first season, he wins the Super Bowl with the Rams, wins the MVP, throws like 43 touchdowns, like an absolutely outstanding career. And then he, goes on to have a remarkable, stretch of time with the Rams and then with the Arizona Cardinals, going back to the Super Bowl with them, unfortunately losing to the Pittsburgh Steelers. But for me, like that was a guy because like, I think that one consistent thing with the guys that I really like a lot are the great stories, and he being a guy that had to work so hard to get where he was, being a small school guy trying to make it in the NFL is hard enough, but then bouncing around to several professional leagues, being a grocery store, bag guy like during the day at some points, like it's such a remarkable story. And he obviously is eventually was able to transcend the limitations that people thought he had and become a Super Bowl winning quarterback and a NFL Hall of Famer. So Kurt Warner this was a close one. He almost got the first spot for me, but he was one of my favorite childhood memories and one of my heroes, to be honest.
Yeah, like the great story. Like I think anybody that knows you, I probably thought it would have been Warner that would have been number 1. So very intrigued to find out who your number 1 actually is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So number one for me is Brett Favre, who played with the Green Bay Packers. He was actually the quarterback before Aaron Rodgers, and so he another little, he was a Southern Miss guy, and then he was actually drafted by the Atlanta Falcons, and there was like this big episode on NFL Network where like the coach for the Falcons didn't really want him, and they used to mess with him and just like, make fun of him and stuff. And they honestly didn't believe in him too much. So he was traded after only one season in Atlanta after being an early second round pick. And people thought he was just like not going to be great at all. So he gets to Green Bay. There's an injury to quarterback Don Majkowski at the time. And then Brett Favre takes over the starting spot, man. And, he has a little bit of struggles first couple of seasons, but eventually he really finds his niche. And I mean, for the longest time, he was the all-time leading passer in the NFL. And a guy that he was a player for me. When you grow up, I think that we really associate and we idolize players that like play the game what we perceive to be the right way. And this was a guy for me that like every play, man, like he played it like it was his absolute last. He laid his body on the line. He put everything out there. And was it always perfect? No, because I mean, he threw a lot of interceptions, some bad interceptions and bad games. He's in the Hall of Fame because he's one of the best quarterbacks ever, though. But for me, watching him on Sundays was one of my favorite childhood memories because I just like him diving into the end zone, him like throwing snowballs at his players in the huddle just to like get them going. Like he was just such a great leader and such an outstanding and competitive player that he really like encapsulated football for me for a little while there. It was like, because everybody, every fan wants to watch the quarterback position because they're the most important player on the field. They might be the most important player in all of sports, at least American sports, right? Because like, that's the guy when you talk about sports, the quarterback position. And for me, being able to watch him and seeing how great he was and the competitiveness he played with and the fire that he played with, like I always wanted to emulate that. And I felt like every time I played football, I played with the same passion. Like I wanted to play that way. I wanted to play hard. And that was a big part of Brett Favre's game. And nobody could ever question for a second how much he loved it, every day. And he was a guy that like, it seemed like he held on a little too long because he just didn't want to stop playing football because it was what he loved to do. But for me, he was so much fun, and I really miss watching him play because he was like that guy that like you would call a grinder and a just an emotional dude who, in my opinion, played the game the right way.
Unbelievable. Thank you, Ryan, for your top three. Really interesting. Give us a little bit more in depth since we're not as well. I'm starting to get into it a little bit more, but Pete, it's a good little bit of history there for you on some good quarterbacks that have played the game.
Yeah, definitely for me. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting for some people that maybe Mahomes and Brady didn't make the list, but maybe they can change your mind come Sunday. Who knows?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, if Mahomes keeps doing what he's doing, man, it won't be long until he's up there because, like I said, he just for a condensed amount of time, that guy's probably the best I've ever seen.
Good stuff. So before we go, Ryan, I just want to ask, I'll ask all of us anyway, what do you think? Give me your score prediction for the game on Sunday.
Oh, you're putting me on the spot. I haven't even thought about it too much. Score prediction. Let's go. It's hard to bet against Brady, but I'm going to go 31-27 Kansas City Chiefs. 31-27.
Pete, you want to give a guess?
I'm gonna back up Ryan here. It's hard to bet against that. He knows his stuff. What about you?
I'll go. I've got a feeling it's going to be low scoring for some reason, so I'm going to go 21-18 Chiefs.
Whoa, that's really low scoring game.
I've just got a feeling maybe there'll be a defensive game, but we'll see. It's hard to bet. As you said, it's hard to bet against Mahomes, and then Brady's obviously still got a bit of magic in him, so I could be completely wrong, but I'll go for it, right?
Yep. That's a good thing about predictions, it's nobody's ever right with them, so it's just
Absolutely.
Fun.
Okay, well, thank you, Ryan, for coming on our first episode of the Sports Countdown podcast. It's been a pleasure. Such a high-profile first guest. I don't know how we can top it.
Yeah, it'll be difficult.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you guys so much. Anytime you want to have me back on, I would love to come back on. And I'm going to be rooting for you guys because it's a lot of fun. I think it's a really cool concept and great group here. So I appreciate you guys.
Appreciate that, Ryan.
So
Thank you again. Pete, it's a pleasure as always talking to you. Happy birthday as well. We'll have a birthday today, so
happy birthday.
Go and enjoy that.
Thanks, guys.
Unbelievable. Okay. Thank you for listening to our first podcast. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for more content. Thank you for listening. Take care.